Welcome back, TCB faithful, to yet another episode of the Runback, the series where we dig up those obscure fighting games that look suspiciously familiar for reasons that are definitely not copyright infringement. And as always, we're here to ask one simple question: was this game actually any good? This time, we're trying to figure out how something can manage to look like a Capcom game and an SNK game simultaneously, despite not being made by either of them.
By the year 2000, the arcade scene was still alive and well, but it was beginning to show signs of decline, as home console gaming continued to grow in popularity thanks to systems like the Dreamcast and PS2. The market was shifting, and major fighting game developers such as Capcom, SNK, and Tecmo could see the writing on the wall, as console hardware became powerful enough to reproduce arcade experiences with few compromises. Companies began bringing their biggest titles home. Games like Street Fighter III Third Strike and the Dead or Alive series were no longer confined to arcades, giving players less reason to spend their afternoon feeding quarters into a cabinet. For smaller developers, this created a difficult environment. Not only did they have to compete with the industry's biggest names in arcades, but they also had to contend with these same titles, finding a second life on home consoles.
This brings us to a small company named Fuuki.
Fuuki? Fuck you. Now, I'll shut up now.
It wasn't exactly a household name in the arcade industry. Founded in the late 1970s, the Japanese developer spent most of its existence producing arcade games and hardware, but it never achieved the same level of recognition as giants like Capcom, SNK, Namco, or Sega. While those companies built iconic franchises that would define entire genres, Fuuki remained a much smaller player in the market. That didn't stop them from trying. In 1998, Fuuki released Asura Blade, Sword of Dynasty, a weapons-based fighting game that drew obvious inspirations from popular fighters of that era. 2 years later, they followed it up with today's subject, Asura Busters, Eternal Warrior, an expanded sequel featuring a larger roster, faster gameplay, and mechanics that felt like they had been borrowed from every single major fighting game on the market.
That didn't help it in their already shrinking market. And what really didn't help was, unlike its larger competitors, Asura Buster never received the console port. Whether Fuuki lacked the resources to make one happen, or simply didn't believe it would be profitable is unknown. What we do know is that the game remained strapped in arcades at a time where the fighting game audience was gradually moving elsewhere.
So the game kinda came and went. No console port, no major marketing push, and no real chance to build an audience outside of Japanese arcades. By the time the dust settled, Asura Buster had faded into obscurity, and Fuuki never made another fighting game again.
With that little history lesson out of the way, that leaves us to find out if Fuuki's fighting game swan song had the potential to stand out to begin with. Were Team Crossbody, and was Asura Buster Eternal Warriors any good?
Showtime!
Okay, look, it might be a little mean to say, but this game was obviously inspired by Darkstalkers, right? It isn't just us.
I don't think it was. Probably not directly anyway. Instead of basing the characters around various iconic literary, cinematic, mythological, and fairy tale monsters, like Dracula, Frankenstein, and the Wolfman, Asura Buster pulls its inspiration from, by the looks of it, RPGs. Although this is also kind of a blink and you miss it kind of thing.
Yeah, it's pretty vague here too. You have a samurai, a ninja, a necromancer, and a monk. I think that's easy enough to tell. But then you have a grip of other guys that aren't as easy to identify. Like Goat, what is he? A warrior? A knight? A berserker? Unless he's supposed to be Cloud Strife or something. That might be the case, since Protag Man looks a little like Chrono from Chrono Trigger. He's just a dude with a sword, and don't get us wrong, he's cool, and definitely looks like a high fantasy character. I guess they just named him after what he is.
That's what I'm talking about! That's why he's the MVP! That's why he's the GOAT! The GOAT!
Going back to the Darkstalkers comparisons, Tauros was what seems like a living suit of armor that's also a robot for some reason. I don't know, but he's giving off heavy Anacaris vibes. Then there's no doubt the game's poster girl, Rosemary. She's Morgan and Salak. There's no real getting around that.
Morlock? Saigen?
And once again, if you're not looking for it, it isn't super obvious, and that isn't a bad thing, but it is hard to unsee once it dawned on us. Although clearly inspired by what was popular around that time, Asura Buster has a pretty cool cast of characters.
Too bad the plot doesn't really shed any actual light on who these guys are, since the game was Japanese only and wasn't successful enough for Fuuki to localize the thing. But the general gist is that the game takes place a couple of years after Asura Blade. The various fighters have gathered on a mysterious shrinking continent to investigate its appearance, which apparently is connected to this giant king guy who probably wants to rule the world or something.
From what we can tell, the story is mostly just framework to get these characters in the same place. A lot of the actual narrative seems to be carried by the characters themselves. And honestly, seeing as this is an early 2000s arcade fighter, I doubt there's anything here that's suddenly going to make you change how you feel about the roster. Then again, the game isn't even in English, so maybe we're missing the greatest story ever told.
You see how Rosemary is dressed? Does she really need a plot?
Nope. She perfectly screams character everybody wants back, and then when she comes back, nobody wants to play her unless she's broken. Hey, she is Morgan!
And there's two giant reasons why anybody would want her in anything.
Because it's certainly not for her personality, let me tell you.
Diggity dog.
Graphically, yeah, this is the first thing that jumped out at us. Asura Buster is a really good looking game. Not necessarily in a this changes the industry forever sort of way, but kinda in the late 90s arcade fighter way where every sprite looks like somebody cared.
Yeah, that's probably the best way to put it. Nothing here is reinventing the wheel, but the animation is smooth, the characters are expressive, and the special effects have a lot of impact.
The character designs help a lot here too. Even if some of them look a little familiar, they're all visually distinct. You can immediately tell who's who from across the screen, which is important because some obscure fighting games have rosters where everyone kind of blends in together after a while. That's definitely not the case here.
The stages are pretty nice too. They're not packed with interactive elements or anything, but they're colorful, detailed, and do a good job selling the fantasy setting. And honestly, that's kind of the story of their entire graphical presentation. Again, nothing here is revolutionary, but everything is polished. Fuuki clearly knew how to get the most out of their hardware.
The soundtrack, on the other hand, it's good.
That's the review?
That's the review. No, but seriously, the music does exactly what it needs to do. It's energetic and dramatic and fits the overall vibe of the game.
A lot of the tracks feel like they belong as some lost PlayStation RPG.
That's actually a pretty good description of it. There's a lot of heroic sounding melodies and dramatic battle themes. It isn't all great. It's small, but what I think is Toro's theme gets a little repetitive fast because it's really short and it's high pitched. It gets annoying after a while. And Resident Ninja Stage feels like a couple of keys away from Tatsunoko suing somebody. But all in all, it's just okay.
The soundtrack isn't packed with all-time fighting game classics, but it never feels out of place either.
Exactly. You probably won't be humming most of these songs a week later like you would with some of Capcom's or SNK's greatest hits, but while you're playing, they do their job exceptionally well.
Which kind of sums up Asura Buster's presentation as a whole. Honestly, it's one of those games where you could tell developers may not have had the biggest budget, but they definitely put the work in.
And that not really amazing 9-to-5 blue-collar feeling translates right over to the gameplay.
Hold up, I do want to shout out Alice's theme.
Yeah, it's actually probably the best theme in the game.
It's not helping the Darkstalkers allegations though.
Nah, it's not beating those.
The comparison to Darkstalkers doesn't stop at the visuals. The gameplay also feels like it's drawing heavily from Capcom's horror-themed fighter.
Although the moment flow was more SNK than Capcom, Asura Buster has that fast, grounded, momentum-heavy feel, but layers it with Capcom-style systems like chain combos, air juggles, push blocks, guard cancels, and launchers. The result is a game that feels like it's constantly being pulled from both sides of the fighting game spectrum.
And again, I know we keep saying this, but nothing here is going to completely blow you away. But in a way, that kind of feels like the point. The roster is varied in terms of archetypes, even if some characters feel like variations of that same idea, like Yasao and Satoru, or Alice and Alice.
While it may not be overflowing with originality, Asura Buster does have a few ideas that stand out. EX Special Moves, for example, uses the standard input plus 2 attack buttons, but instead of just being stronger versions of existing attacks, some of them completely change the move or replace it entirely. That makes experimenting with meter more interesting than just saving it for supers. You actually want to see what your character's EX options are.
And then there's the launcher system. Every character has access to launcher attacks that lead to air combos. You can even perform these attacks in the air to bounce your opponents off the wall, extending combos even further. If you push it too far though, the opponent becomes temporarily invincible when they recover, so there is a limit. You can't just loop it forever, but smart play still allows for some pretty long sequences.
That's not the end of it either. Players can air attack out of combos by pressing all 3 attack buttons, gaining temporary invincibility, but at a cost. You'll fall more slowly afterwards, which gives your opponent more time to set up a punish if they read your escape. And more importantly, it costs 1 bar of meter, which matters a lot because EX moves are arguably some of your strongest tools, so you're constantly choosing between saving yourself or saving your resources.
That creates a pretty interesting tension. Do you eat the combo and keep your meter for offense, or spend it to escape and give up future options? Attaching resources to a cause of something as standard as an air recovery adds a layer of decision making that you usually don't think about in most fighters.
Another big meter option is Boost Mode, Asura Buster's take on Darkstalkers' Dark Force system. When activated, your character enters an install state that grants unique bonuses. Some characters gain clones similar to Vism, others gain hyper armor, and some simply increase in speed. The effects vary wildly depending on the character. Boost mode drains meter over time and ends once it's depleted, and some characters have significantly shorter durations than others. The mechanic is fine, useful in the right situations, but not especially balanced or elegant. And visually, it can get messy fast. The screen effects make it harder to read certain attacks, and the constant background motion can be distracting.
The one truly unique mechanic Asura Buster brings to the table is Last Stand. Once per match after being knocked out, a player can activate it by pressing all 3 attack buttons. This triggers a 10-second comeback state where the opponent remaining life carries over. If you defeat them within that time, you'll start the round or even the match. If you fail, you'll lose immediately. Timeouts also prevent activation, which adds another layer of strategy. If the player has a life lead, they might choose to run out the clock rather than risk giving the opponent a last stand opportunity.
It's a little gimmicky, but it's not without its depth. As the match reaches its climax, both players have to constantly evaluate win conditions. Do you play safe to protect your life lead, or stay aggressive to avoid giving your opponent any comeback window? Even a small life deficit can change how both players approach the entire round, especially if last stand is still available. It creates a strange kind of psychological pressure. You're never fully safe until the match is actually over.
At the end of the day, that's the long and short of Asura Buster's combat. It's not revolutionary and it doesn't really introduce any ideas that you haven't seen before, but it's fast, expressive, and mechanically dense enough to avoid players who dig into it. It has a low barrier to entry and surprisingly high skill ceiling if you're willing to push it.
Huh. Kinda like another game.
So, after all that, where does Asura Buster actually land?
Honestly, it's one of those games that's a lot more interesting than it is essential. It's clearly built on the foundation of ideas from bigger, more influential fighters, but instead of feeling like a cheap imitation, it ends up as this weird hybrid that kinda works in its own terms.
Yeah, it doesn't really feel like it's trying to compete with the heavy hitters of its time. It feels more like it's trying to exist in the same space. And weirdly enough, that's where a lot of its charm comes from.
The presentation is solid, the roster works, and the systems, while not perfectly balanced, actually give you enough depth to mess around with and find something fun. But at the same time, nothing here is really pushing the genre forward. There's no one mechanic, no one system, no one moment where you go, yeah, this changed everything.
It's not a revolution, it's a really competent remix.
And that's probably the best way to put it. It's fast, it's expressive, it's mechanically interesting enough to keep you engaged, but it's also clearly a product of its time, stuck in a shrinking arcade scene without the reach or resources to become something bigger.
No console port, no big tournament, not a long-running franchise, just a solid arcade fighter that showed up, did his job, and got left behind.
Which brings us to the final verdict. For what it is, a late-era arcade fighter from a small developer trying to stand out in a crowded genre, Asura Buster does more right than wrong, but it never quite breaks out of that hidden gem space into something truly great.
So if we're grading it,
we're giving Asura Buster Eternal Warriors a B.
That feels about right. Respectable, fun and burst, not quite a must-play.
A game that we're happy exists, even if you can totally see why it got overlooked.
And speaking truthfully, that might be the most fitting outcome for it.
With that said, that wraps up this just good enough not to be bad episode of the Runback. How do you feel about Asura Buster? Do you agree with us? Or do you think it's an overlooked gem? Sound off in the comments and let us know. Be sure to like, comment, hype, and subscribe while you're at it, and help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Until then, we'll see you next time on the Runback.
Buddy. All right.